Hello everybody, I'm Juliet from Blaxit and I am doing this interview for Gambia. And I would like you to meet two of the shining bright stars that are here, two of the brightest brains and intellectuals from here in the Gambia. These are two young geniuses. And I would like to introduce you to my guest on my right, Tony Mendy. He is the protégé, he is the protege, and he is a future leader of the Gambia.
Hello to our beautiful viewers. Let's say I'm glad to join you, Juliet. It's always nice meeting you and sharing ideas of Pan-Africanism and leadership in general.
Now, Ousman, I'm going to introduce Ousman because Ousman has been in, let's just say, in the spotlight of late due to an interview which we actually conducted together on the Blaxit channel, which has now gone viral. So welcome, iGambia viewers.
Thank you very much, our wonderful viewers, and thank you very much, Juliet, for giving me that wonderful platform. So I am so glad to be here today, and I look forward to a productive discussion as long as the Pan-African issues are concerned and Africa in general is concerned.
Excellent. Excellent, no problem. Just like to say, before I start off, I want to thank the iGambia team for granting us this platform, and I want to thank the iGambia team for doing the wonderful works that they have been doing year in, year out. And I think if it's not been thanked for, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much, because iGambia gave me, myself, Juliet, the platform in which to launch Blaxit. So, and in fact, it was that interview with Woda Maya, which went viral for myself, that gave me the platform to start Blaxit. So I want to thank iGambia for giving me 4.4 million views. Yay! How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm doing good.
How are you handling the fame?
Yeah, it's just like to say thank you to everybody that is out there that appreciate the message, because that is exactly what we were doing. We were just saying what we believe in and what we think it should be done for the Gambia, for the continent, and how we should understand our own reality as a people. Mm-hmm. So we just thank everybody out there for the wonderful comments. You know, people had to call me to confirm and all this stuff. So it was really good. It was really amazing, you know. It also gave me another opportunity to meet different individuals in the struggle, youth leaders everywhere within the continent, and that was a plus to myself, and you know, and it gives me hope for the future of this continent.
Fabulous. Excellent, excellent. We know there are lots of intelligent young Africans out there like yourself, like Tony. How were you discovered, and how were you discovered?
Martin, let me say, iGambia chief proprietor, came to notice about me on social media and the activities that I do constantly, and that's how I came to be known by him and those close to him.
I know that I did a presentation at the university in the law department, which was wonderfully arranged by you, and he has expertise in organisation. I tell you this much: you're going to be someone serious in the future to behold. I know you are. I feel I'm in the presence of greatness. So tell me, how was you discovered? I should really be answering that question myself, but how was you discovered?
Yeah, I think like Juliet, like you are the better position to answer that. We met in the Pan-African Youth Summit actually, and then I saw her, and then I said, wow, I recognize her because I'm a subscriber to her YouTube channel. And I watched the interview that you did with Woda Maya when he visited the Gambia, and many other interviews after that. So I said to my friend, because I was there with another boy, so I told him that I want to go and greet her. Let me just say hi and appreciate the works that she's doing. And then you were like, wow, you're a subscriber, so let us give it a shot. We must take an interview. So that is how this whole interview came about. And then you posted these questions, and then I gave my opinions and my understanding about the Gambia and the African reality. So now it is out there, and I'm so glad that the message is well received by individuals as well. It just means that it is another task on us that we have to do more findings, more reading, and understanding the continent more, and then setting a pattern for for development that people look up to us as of now. So we also need to understand what the African youth want, and then we have to be able to speak for them.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I'm going to be coming hard and fast with you. These questions have been provided for by iGambia subscribers. Okay. So if you don't like the question, don't blame me. Okay. So what motivated you to go into Pan-Africanism as a young man, as a young person, and at what age did you start ascribing to Pan-African thoughts?
I cannot specifically state the exact year that I get into Pan-Africanism. What I must say is that our education system did fail us, and most of us, and Ousman will attest to that, most of us who ascribe to the Pan-African ideology do not do so because our school system taught us the idea of Pan-Africanism and so forth. Even up to the university level, where I am right now currently, this idea of Pan-Africanism is not being taught. And through my own desire for reading and research and so forth, I get to learn and appreciate the characters of our founding fathers of the continent. And from them, I have noted the idea of Pan-Africanism, especially from Kwame Nkrumah, was one of the things that he was so much passionate about. And if you were to assess them compared to the current leaders of our generation, you would likely, comparatively, put them an edge over what we have right now in the continent. And my desire also to have a genuine leadership that represents the continent make me immediately fall in love with them and continue researching and seeking to be myself, because Pan-Africanism in general represents who I am as an individual. So that's how I came to fall in love or get the idea of Pan-Africanism through my own reading and so forth. And over the years, a lot of people also inspire us. We follow the Lumumbas, the Malemas, and lot of other individuals. Even in Gambia here, they have the like of Halifa Sallah. You know, even though he's a socialist, but outrightly you can tell that he is a Pan-Africanist. And socialism and Pan-Africanism, we more or less do not, we cannot separate the two, because even the founding father, Kwame Nkrumah, was a socialist in a way.
Yeah, exactly. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you very much. I just want to ask you one question. What's the first book you read on Pan-Africanism?
I remember reading about Amiga Cabral of Bissau, Guinea-Bissau. It's one of the tough Pan-African guerrilla fighters. Sekou Touré, the same thing. But I can't really specify which of the books I first read.
So tell me about you, and how did you get into Pan-Africanism? Where did your inspiration come from in terms of Pan-Africanism, and where did you start, ascribing to Pan-African thoughts? Where did that come from? What inspired you?
Yeah, just as my brother was just explaining, that the education system that we have in Africa is that it doesn't help us a lot to know about the real identity of the Africans or the people who stood to liberate this continent. So you come to realize that you have to read extremely well. You have to read beyond the curriculum to understand the real Pan-African agenda. So as a result of this, even because I was in the arts field when I was in senior school, and that love for reading was, giving me the opportunity to look into Pan-Africanist movement and who were the pioneers and what were the roles that they were playing at the time. So going back to look into the Pan-African movements within the continent and those in the diaspora at the time gives you that ability to look into the spirit that they have, the likes of, Marcus Garvey, the likes of B. Dubois, the likes of George Padmore, and etc. It gives you like an insight as to what these people were actually fighting for. So that has always been a motivation to me. And then you also come to realize that we are lucky to have the likes of Professor Lumumba, as he made mention. We are lucky to have the likes of Dr. Arikana. We are lucky to have the likes of, Dr. Laila and others, because following them, they give you an insight and they serve as a guide, as a mentor to all African youths, that we really need to understand the real Pan-African spirit and the real Pan-Africanism in order for us to set a pattern of our own development. So some of these literatures, the videos online on YouTube and etc. have really been, things that are used as a tool to better understand Pan-Africanism.
Oh, great. Okay, so, I mean, what advice would you give to young people who don't seem to be concerned about issues bothering them in terms of continental development?
I necessarily don't blame those who don't follow, youths who don't follow up issues in the continent, because I believe that the way they are nurtured from the onset, they were not nurtured to think along the line that they are Africans and that Africa is where they should be and here is where they should develop and work towards the progress of the continent. And for us to change that perception, we need to go back to our education system. Tailor it to suit the reality of the continent and what it needs to progress. If you nurture a kid or a child from age day one to have the concept of Pan-Africanism, to understand who Nkrumah was, to understand who Nyerere was, for example, Amilcar Cabral, and so forth, all the great founding fathers of the continent, this child will grow up to appreciate the characters and the lifetime of these individuals. So, but it is so ironical that our education system, we still leave it in the hands of others, and we don't necessarily talk about who we are. So for me, those youths who don't look into the progress of the continent, you don't blame them, but I also believe that we also have a role to play in changing that, and one way you can do that is through the education system, and secondly, through the mainstream media. You understand that what we portray in the media is all about the West, the beauty of the West, and so forth. And they naturally would subscribe to these ideas. So if you have a radio system throughout the continent, you should begin talking about Pan-Africanism, teaching, having Pan-African programs, the TV, and so forth. And the more we have this, the more other kids are going to fall in love with it, and they grow up with it. And any kid who grows up with an idea, you're going to kill the individual when they grow up, but they will never easily let that idea go off them. So I think that's an avenue which we can explore to make sure that we reorient the minds of young Africans in order for them to concentrate towards the progress of the continent.
You guys are so, so you young African men are so intelligent. You young Gambian men are so articulate. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. So I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to go really into the development aspect. So we've heard that you rejected a scholarship offer to study abroad and you chose to study in Rwanda instead. Yeah? So what was the motivation behind that decision? And, what was it about Rwanda that compared to these other developed countries that you rejected? What was the motivating factor?
Yeah, and there's this issue that sometimes individuals will even call me and say, "Hey, Ous, are you okay? So you're not taking the Canadian scholarship?" I said, "Hey, I've been living without anything, having to do with Canada. So why do you think without Canada I will still not survive in the future?" So, but what I want us to understand is that now what Africa needs is an African model. We've been borrowing a lot from the West, starting from independence to date. All our development models that we adopt at the regional level, at the continental level, at the country level, are all influenced by Western powers.
Yeah.
It is high time for us to look inward. And how do we integrate the development that we have within the continent? Now, communication is very key in development, and people must understand the way in which development ideas evolve, and development itself is actually transformed from one generation to another or from one country to another. Today we find it difficult within the African continent to trade among ourselves. We find it very difficult within the African continent to travel within ourselves. Even networking becomes a challenge. Now, how do we defeat this? Is by going into look into the realities of each and every African country, and how do we tailor it down to various African countries, and therefore we can move the African agenda forward. What is going on in Rwanda is something that is celebrated by all Africans. Yeah. For the simple fact that the country that was brought down to zero by Western powers, that is crystal clear that they were the one behind the genocide.
Of course.
The country is today set with a paradigm, is set with a development model, is set with education system, it's set with its own technology, making it possible for them to realize what they are realizing today. It is the same transformation that I want to see in the Gambia in 5 years' time. Yeah. The same transformation I want to see it in Liberia in 5 years' time. The same transformation is what I want to see in Burundi in 5 years' time. I want to see the same transformation in Chad, in any other place in the African continent. But why is it that they make it, fearful for us to embrace the ideas of other African countries and still trust the same people that have been dominating us for 400 years? That is what we need to understand.
No.
So there is no way. I am not looking forward to go for a master's degree or a PhD degree in any Western country. Yeah. I am going to an African country, and for now, my priority is Rwanda. From Rwanda, we will look into another African country. So that is it.
African power, my brother. African power. That's what we do. That's how we roll. Yeah. How do you perceive Africa's development in general? And what do you think is responsible for some of the resistance with regard to our development?
Okay, before answering that, let me first congratulate Ousman and then thank him for passing the most difficult test that many African youths will not pass. And I really, just day for yesterday, I was arguing on his behalf because someone said, the same question, why would he have to choose Rwanda over Canada and other European countries? And I think he has motivated a lot of people to stick to the idea of Pan-Africanism and believe in what they believe, and that the continent, with this belief, we are really going to move ahead. What I perceive of the African development and what are the resistance, let me say, if we are going to measure the development of Africa, we should not use Europe as the yardstick to measure the development of Africa. We have to look at our cultural realities, what is real in Africa, how we live our life is different from how Europeans live their life. So if you find me in the village, or you see us eating together in the same bowl, it doesn't represent poverty. It represents our sense of humanity and humanism in general, and not the poverty that they tend to portray on the media. Exactly. So even if they're going to measure poverty in Africa, they use it according to their own set standard and not according to our ways of life. That's why I don't want to talk about development through the eyes or the models of the European and how they perceive us to be. I would say the fact remains that we have a long way, we have more to do as a continent. That's a reality. Some of our people are still in poverty, even though that's not the general image of Africa, but they portray us, the entire Africa is poor. Some of our people are still in wars and crisis and so forth. And I must say also that in every black glove that you see, there's a white hand in it. Some of this conflict that I see in Africa is the activities of Europeans. They engage in economic nationalism, they cause war, some of the crises across the continent, and they stick on reaping the resources of those continents. Congo, you remember, since Patrice Lumumba was there, until today, Congo has never tasted peace. You go to all other mineral-rich African countries, even Nigeria, people will be surprised. An army, for example, Nigeria, a 100-year-old army, Boko Haram will just wake up less than 5 years, and Nigeria cannot be able to defeat Boko Haram. We therefore must ask questions, who are the individuals behind this and so forth? And then we must realize that our problems are not only internal, but there are also external forces that motivate or that contribute towards the crisis in the continent. And this crisis hampers our development. You understand that our development initially, even Europe, there is no continent that has not gone through wars and so forth. Europe has fought tribal wars more than any other continent in the globe. They have fought. But Africa was going through the same process. But what happened actually is that our process was interrupted by slavery and colonialism. And that shows a total transformation of the lives and the system of governance, our political structure, everything changed. And now we are more or less forcing ourselves to adopt what the Europeans are already comfortable in doing. Our people don't understand what the British model of parliament is, or the system of governance that you have in place. So our traditional institutions of governance are reduced to nothing.
Yeah.
So the development of the continent will come to be, it's in the right track. I don't say that we have to go back to our old model system, but what we have to do is to fuse the two and to see what best suits us as a continent, and we really progress towards having a well-dignified people who are given what they work for.
You know, I see Africa as being Africa. I don't see Africa as being Europe. I don't see Africa as being America. And to be honest with you, I'm here because it's not. I'm here because it's not. I'm here because Africa is Africa, because Africa is home. What do you suggest in terms of models, yeah, to be adopted to promote the development across the continent? Yeah. So what models do you suggest can be adopted, yeah, across the continent to promote development?
Like when we talk about models of development, in most cases we are trapped under few ideologies. That a country has to be socialist, a country has to be a communist, or to be a capitalist. Mm-hmm. Now the pioneers of all this came from different environments from the African continent. So, and their philosophy, their ideas were informed by the society, the environment, and the time in which they evolved from. Now, what does Africa have in hand? What does Africa have as its unique own? That is what we need to look into. Somebody posed this kind of question to Nelson Mandela before he became a president in South Africa. It was actually in a town hall meeting, that what model is he going to accept in South Africa if he happens to lead South Africa to independence? Is it going to be capitalist, or is it going to be socialist or communist? His response was that we do not care whether the cat is black or white as long as it can catch mice. So what Africa needs now is, how do we make sure that our realities are channeled into a development model that is uniquely ours? Now, it can be informed by the African reality in a sense that this continent is very rich with mineral resources.
Yeah.
This continent is very rich with human resources, and that is the youthful population that we have. It is a blessing to the continent. Now, how do we make sure that we attain that economic growth, protecting our environment, at the same time programming a future for the African youths, so that they will be able to have a generation that will be well equipped with old modern technologies, and then making it possible for us to have that sustainable growth. To do that, we all need to make sure that the policies that we adopt at our own country level are informed by the people at the countryside. Yes. And then the agendas that are accepted by the African Union has to be informed by the African countries, and then let the people be driven that development models. Let us make sure that the people take a say. The people know the solution to their problems. Of course. So let them initiate the solutions, and then we will just be there shaping it, making sure that the development that we want is realized. But as long as we don't do this, we are just there copying models. Mm-hmm. From independence to date, we've been copying different models from the international level and from other Western countries and Western powers. We have seen what the SAP have done to countries in Africa, and most so in sub-Saharan Africa. We've adopted the structural adjustment plan. It has failed us because the mission of the structural adjustment plan and its sole purpose was, how do they make sure that they can pay back the commercial banks their loans? So they introduced it on us, cut spending on public, institutions and etc., making it difficult for the African countries to, in fact, budget or have a budget for their own projects at their own country level. Yeah. So this unending debt continue to occur. The IMF is there, the World Bank is there, giving us loans that we can never pay. It's high time for us to reject. We cannot develop in loans.
No, you can't.
We have to think inward. How do we use the resources that we have as a continent and then to build a future for this continent? When we look at Congo alone, it is feeding the whole world today.
Exactly.
And they still are trapped under abject poverty. That is a question that we need to answer. If we cannot answer this as a continent, then who are we? Yeah. It is a big insult and a big blow to the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism. So they had a spirit and they had an agenda, and that is the unification of the continent. Mm-hmm. And if we are able to attain this, we will be able to set that pattern of development that we want, like Rwanda is doing it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that the answer to that is African descendants also returning back to Africa and bringing their inward investment, bringing their skills, and working in partnership with our continental brothers and sisters. I believe that is part of the answer. And regardless of any detractors or naysayers against that, they would only not want that because of the losses that will be taken, or the financial loss that will be attributed to that migration across the repatriation. It's the loss.
When he spoke about Congo, that's one country that I'm always concerned about. But he really touched a lot of issues. When you say the African continent is independent, if you right now, if we are to be realistic, we are not independent. What the colonizers did to us, and if we must understand this, is that they replaced their own men with other men, or what we call little French men, who are now serving their own interests. If you look at the trend, they were not willing to go. They were forced to go, and they know that it will be catastrophic if they were to stay. So what they did was to more or less replace their own men, the governors that used to be here before. They replaced it with men who were willing to serve them. That's why in new independent Africa, all the leaders who were not ready to serve them were either toppled or assassinated. Yeah. So even till date, that same mindset is prevailing among the African leadership. They either lack the courage to confront the colonizers or serve their people, or be like the like of Gaddafi used to be at some point, or to be like Paul Kagame and speak out and truly represent his people. Rwanda today, for example, is developed or is developing, and you will know that it's an isolated country, more or less an isolated country, around considering the nation that surround it. The same thing happened in Libya. If you have one country developed and all the rest surrounding it is not developed, the likelihood of the colonizers or the ever-being colonizers intruding or causing disruption in that country is very high. So at the end of the day, I will not be surprised if Rwanda is brought to ground zero. I will not be surprised. So the model that we need to adopt as a continent, Nyerere said it. Nyerere looked at socialism, for example. He said we cannot copy and paste the Marxist idea of socialism and bring it to Tanzania. It doesn't work. For him, he said, let us look at the cultural realities here, and he came up with the idea of Ujamaa, right? Even Sir Karabajawara of the Gambia also did the same thing. He came up with the Tesito, like let's self-help, because he understood that in our environment, we are not capitalistic in nature. Africans are not. We have that humanism in us. We share, we care, and so forth. So if we are to build our economic model, we should build it around our values, around the realities of our environment, and not to allow or to keep on copy and pasting. And the saddest thing of all of this is the fact that our leaders are made to believe that unity is not strength. And those who are advocating against the unity of Africa, they are themselves united. When Kwame Nkrumah said, let's unite, they told the African leaders, unity will be to your detriment. And those who are telling them, unity will be to your detriment, they are themselves united. So for me, it beat my imagination that the continent, the leaders of the continent, cannot still see the reason or the need for them to be united. Asia have done it. Europe have done it. Americans have done it. We are the only continent that is divided, and we cannot, over a century now, we cannot still see the need to unite. And that is just very, very, very sad.
It should be the United Empire of Africa. That's what it needs to be, the United Empire of Africa. And you know what? I mean, I personally think that it's possible. Yeah, I think it's possible. And I think with future leaders like yourself, Tony, and yourself, Ousman, I think it's totally possible in the future. If you stay on track, if you stay focused, if you stay determined and committed to that change, and you work steadfastly towards it, and you educate others along the way, then I don't see why not. Mr. Solanke, we were talking about him just today, weren't we? Yeah, and we were talking about the original African Union. So let's look at, you know, models of progression. Let's look at models of community, because the Eurocentric model is one of individuality. It's one of selfishness. It's one of capitalistic gain at the expense of others. Mm-hmm. But the model that we have in Africa is based on Ubuntu.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the model that serves us best. So that is where we should go and we should follow too. So I'm going to speed through these questions. We'll be here all day because we can chat. I can anyway. But what do you aspire to do for your country, Gambia, and for the continent in the near future? What do you aspire to do?
For myself and for the youth at large, like, there are so many things that I have, you know, in stuff. Sometimes it's like you produce ideas and all those stuff. But what happened is that I am somebody who loves the classroom a lot. So even no matter how far I go, no matter how long this is going to take, I am still going to be in the academics field, because that is where I believe that is where I belong. Mm-hmm. So the other initiatives are as that I want to work on skill development, making sure that in 5 years to come, people will come from centers, skill training centers, that has my name. People are going to be produced from institutions with well-equipped knowledge that is going to impact on the society, because this is what our education system don't have. When we look into the education system, people can spend 15 years in school and yet cannot have any skill in them. And that is an insult to the forefathers of the Pan-African agenda, because they had the spirit that the best way to liberate individuals is to feed them with the right information and the right education. Mm-hmm. Education is the only way out of darkness, is the only way out of ignorance, and it is the only way to the glorious light. If we want to get to where we all desire as a continent, this education system must change. Students in the Gambia are sometimes trapped with examination issues to the extent that you can never realize their potentials and talents. Mm-hmm. Because once you failed an examination like grade 12 or grade 9 in the Gambia, it starts with your own family. That's where they start telling you that this is the beginning of your failure in life. So people started failing life stories as a result of an examination that they did not cross. We need to look into that, because people have skills, yet they live and die with it and never realize it. That is what we need to defeat. And we can do that if we have good, career counseling mechanisms, where we can easily realize the potential of an individual. Either the individual could be a very good leader, the person could be a good entrepreneur, the person could be a very good farmer, or a very good engineer, and etc. We need to equip individuals and help them in this basis to realize these potentials. In the Gambia, for instance, we have the STEM, where we strengthen students in the maths or doing well in mathematics and in the sciences and etc. But then you also come to realize that what are we producing as a country? What are we producing as a continent? It's because they are not receiving the actual education that they need. Yeah. Are you seeing? So that is what we need to defeat. And in the near future, my struggle will always be in this area. First on academic and also on skill centers.
Yeah. No, that's actually well answered. And I think, like what you said, not everybody is academically driven. Yeah. Some people have different skill sets, and that needs to be acknowledged. And I do agree with what you're saying with regard to exams. Who says that examinations are even the right method of being able to demonstrate your ability? All it is a memory test. And I just don't think that a memory test is the right way to go about enhancing learning. I think there are so many different methods. And the thing is, everybody learns differently. It's the same way people absorb information differently. And so there's been a question posed, which is, it's undeniably true that Africa's culture is under threat of extinction due to globalization. Do you have any thoughts for young Pan-Africanists? How do we sustain our culture moving forward?
I think the idea of globalization itself is not placed in the right parameters. And whatever is being globalized, whatever is African cannot be globalized. Whatever is anti-African or non-African in nature, originally, let me say, quote unquote, is pushed on us. Whatever culture that we value, whatever way of life that we used to have, is being demonized in a way. Even the words black itself is being demonized. Black Friday, black market, black day, everything black is, there's negative attribution towards it. So our cultures is not been, we are more or less restricted from pushing it as a global value and so forth. Even human rights, for example, is being put to us as if it is a Eurocentric issue. When we Africans have been in the practice of human rights prior to, in fact, European civilization taking center stage and so forth. So the only way we can preserve our culture and values is to, again, put it in the education system. And I must emphasize, if you see Chinese come here, come or go around the entire continent, build their Chinese institution, trying to teach Mandarin and so forth, in the next 100 years or 200 years, you and I will not be here, but those who are going to be here, our 4 great grandchildren, for example, are going to be speaking Mandarin. Instead of being able to speak the language of Kunta Kinte, Mandinka, they will not be able to speak that, but they will be able to speak Mandarin and so forth, or they will be forced to speak English, such that English will be the yardstick to measure their intelligence or their value in society. So our leaders need to understand that we need to protect our culture, our values, and so forth, in as much they are not repugnant to the well-being of anyone. So even be it from the way we dress, be it from the type of food we cook, you go to Europe, for example, you struggle, from what I get to learn, you struggle to find real African food. But you come to Africa, even in Gambia here, even restaurants that we are built, even what you find there is European food. So it means that even us here, we are being more or less made to believe that good food has to be European food. If it's not Gambian food, if it's Gambian food, it's not nice, it has to be European food. If it's Gambian clothes, it's not nice, it has to be European clothes. If Gambian hairstyle or African hairstyle is not nice, it has to be European. And now you've seen our sisters now bleaching. Like, it's a multi-million-dollar industry out there, and it's an insult to our sense of reasoning that what your color is not valuable, that you don't need to be black, you have to be something else. Yeah. So there's a lot of attack on the continent and on the black man, both economically, politically, scientifically. There is a lot of attack on the continent of Africa. And we seem to just lack the leadership to really guide the people. You must understand also, not the leadership, if you have the leadership that can guide the people, even if the leadership is rejected today, in the future, people are going to value that leadership and understand what the leadership stood for. Kwame Nkrumah was not appreciated by everyone. Today, not everybody is valuing the role of PLO Lumumba. He's not accepted in Kenya. He's not really valued in Kenya. But outside the continent, he's valued. When he dies, people are going to value him. You go to South Africa, you have Malema. It's not being appreciated there much as I really want him to be appreciated. But when he dies, people are going to see the things that he raised and the need for us to really take up the affairs of our continent. We are not really in charge. Yeah. And that is saddening.
I'm glad you mentioned Lumumba and PLO Lumumba, who I am a great admirer of and hope to interview one day. And also Julius Malembo, who I am a very big supporter of and will hope to interview him one day. And also Dr. Arikana, that I'm a great model of that. I'm a great supporter of, and I hope to interview her one day also. But I want to stay focused on the subject of, like I said, globalization. And I want you to unpack globalization in its definition of what it means to Africa, the potential issues and threats and dangers that are imparceled within the whole aspect of globalization. So what say you about unpack globalization for me and explain to me what you think the threats are in terms of globalization to Africa, the continent, and also to Gambia, to the Republic of the Gambia?
Yeah, I just want to say this very, very clear, that no country develops using a foreign education system. No country develops using a foreign culture. And no country develops using foreign models. Now, looking at globalization, these are the three scopes that it looks into: movement of ideas, movement of cultures, and regional or trade in general. How do they make sure that the market is open there and then everybody have equal share? Now, how can you place the Gambia and the United States in the same market struggle, a country as small as the Gambia and a country as big as the United States?
Exactly.
How do you compare Gambian industries and American industries? How do you compare the movement of cultures if they have the media with them and we have the smaller platforms? How do you understand that movement that is going to be in our culture when they actually can get access to whatever they want to access in, and we find it very difficult to access within the own Western civilization and etc.? If globalization is true, why do our brothers and sisters have to die in the Mediterranean Sea? If globalization is something true, why do our brothers and sisters have to be in refugee camps and in detention centers in the West? These are fundamental questions that African continent need to answer.
Yeah.
To understand the real agenda for globalization. We have been fighting about colonialism. We have been fighting about imperialism. We have been fighting about neocolonialism. Today, globalization is as dangerous as colonialism.
Exactly.
And they need to understand this.
It's true.
And it is dangerous in a sense that they intervene in the market system, whereby now they make it to us that whatever project that we have within the African continent, we just go out there and hire a Western company or a Chinese company to come and do the construction.
Thank you.
Now, if we are all doing this, how are we empowering our own architects? How are we empowering our own entrepreneurs? How are we empowering our own industries and our own trade or markets within the African continent? Recently, Africa signed the free trade agreement, and we're still having a problem of implementation, telling you that the African continent, we trust more the people that dominate us for 400 years than our own neighbors.
Exactly.
This is a fundamental question that we need to answer as a continent. And that is exactly what we are trying to say. Let us travel to understand what is going on within the African continent. Let us be able to design something that we own. And let us look into what are we exporting out of this continent. It has to be clear with us. We cannot continue to feed the world with raw materials. That is not the agenda for our development.
It's not sustainable.
We need to own the industries. We need to own the factories. We need to design a model of development for our own and let them come to take the finished products from us.
Yes.
There we can make money, we can create employment, and we will be independent.
Exactly.
But as long as we depend on the Western world, we depend on the Chinese, we are not going anywhere. We need to realize this as our potentials, and then we need to shape that as something that is uniquely ours.
Power, words, sound. Wow. Serious. You know? You know what? I'm so impressed by you both. I got to say, I'm taking a little break here because I'm just going to come off sheet a little bit. Sorry, Gambia. Yeah. But I have to come off sheet because I have to say that I'm being educated here. I don't know if everybody is hearing the way that I'm hearing and being inspired, the way that I'm being inspired. But between you both, I just feel so elevated. I really do. I feel inspired. And I feel, you know, as though I'm receiving an education, one that I should have received before. And so even if my journey to come home was for this very moment, it has been worth every single second of my life to be here in this moment with you two. What are your thoughts on the craze for killer loans by African leadership? And be it from the Chinese or the IMF or any other organization, what's your view on them, and what is the solution, alternatives and solutions?
Generally, the problem of Africa when it comes to loans and aids, grants, and so forth, it boils down to the pathetic leadership that we have in place. Because one cannot understand, for more than a century, or close to a century now, the continent have been taking loans. If throughout all this period, these loans have not moved the continent, it is only reasonable that the leaders think twice now, or to look for another alternative towards addressing the economic of the country, or of the continent. The loans that are given to Africans, and it's sad also to note that the people on whose behalf those loans are taken are mostly not informed or know nothing about those loans. And the conditions attached to these loans at the end of the day is really pathetic that an individual or a leader will go for them. For example, you have China giving, let's say China gave Senegal a $2 million loan to work on a particular project. The design which will be from China, the architect will be from China, the materials to be bought will be bought from China, the workers who are going to work on that project will come from China. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, the country, let's say Senegal again, will have to pay back the loan with interest. If you analyze it technically, Senegal has not really taken a loan. Like you are now giving the money and the condition you have to buy the materials from me. You have to take my citizens to go and work in a company and so forth. At the end of the day, that money you don't even invest in your country, but you are more or less giving it back to China, and again you have to pay an interest on top of it. So loans and grants are not the ways to move the continent. We have to. For me, it's crazy. Sometimes I'm not an economist, but when I think of this, somebody just sits somewhere else and prints paper. Yes. For me, I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but somebody prints paper there. They have the machine, they have everything. They print the paper there and then give you the paper. Yes. And you take your natural resources and then give them, or condition you that you're going to take this black sand here or this mineral here and so forth, and we give you money. I mean, does it really make sense? Does the paper value the mineral in place? No. And so forth. So we really need to look for alternative as to the amount of loans that we have taken in the continent. They do not solve our problem. And unless and until we also take charge of our monetary issues. If in fact the smallest nation in Europe can lend the entire country, let's say England or Britain, can call the entire African nation to go have a UK African summit and so forth. A single nation. You have 54 nations here going to answer for a single nation. Because they have a means to print their money at the end of the day. They say we are giving you loan and so forth. It doesn't realistically, economically wise, it makes sense. But if you are going to be realistic to analyze the issue, it doesn't really make sense that we are still falling trapped to these loans and so forth. And we have noted what they are doing. Even those workers that they do bring to Africa, let's say the Chinese, they come here at the end of the day, they keep on abusing abuse our own citizens in our own continent. Just recently, I read that the Chinese have locked down 8 Nigerians. In Nigeria, you lock them down there for almost close to a month. You're abusing them, you're forcing them to work in their own country, you are enslaving them more or less. In the Gambia, it has been reported again on social media. You have Chinese forcing Gambians to work on the conditions that are not favorable for them, because, and that project is sponsored by Chinese, and they brought Chinese to work again. Really, at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense. You tend to ask, are we really independent? Are we really in charge of our affairs, and so forth? So, like I said earlier, Africa is under attack from both ends, from both angles. And us falling for these loans and debts and so forth will just keep on sustaining the poverty of the continent. And that is why they're always glad. IMF is always glad to pump in money to African leaders, especially the corrupt ones. At the end of the day, even the populists do not even benefit from this money.
Right. I mean, the paper is a promissory note. It's fiat currency. It's not real money. It's not backed by anything. It used to be the gold standard, but it's not anymore. So it's a game of smoke and mirrors. So it's how do we forge a stronger and build a stronger relationship with the diaspora?
Thank you very much. I think with the other question, Tony have really done well in analyzing them. When it comes to building a good relation between the Africans and those in the diaspora, we need to understand that that is necessary for the African development. We're just talking about loans here. How many Africans are in the diaspora with their billions of investment? Mm-hmm. If that is channeled to an African, grant sort of, whereby this same African descent will be the champions of it, will we need to go and borrow money from IMF? No. If they can invest, if they can sponsor, if they can come in to see the realities, but they cannot do this without traveling to the continent. They need to come back and make research to see what are the potential for investment in the continent, and then see where they can put in their resources. From there, we can derive the collective development that we all desire as a continent. And at the same time, also, you come to realize that us as a people need to bridge that disconnection between us and those in the diaspora. Yeah. We have to work with one another. Today, Dr. Arikana and people like Professor Lumumba are doing extremely well. Though we have Professor Lumumba here in Africa, building that connection within African countries and etc. Dr. Arikana is doing well, making sure that African descent in the diaspora are working towards one another, having the same agenda, and coming up with financial initiative, making sure that they can invest in the continent, because that is the future. No matter how rich you are in the diaspora, no matter how rich you invest in the diaspora, once you die, the system takes everything. But invested in Africa, your legacy will live for centuries. The $1,000 that you think it is very small in the diaspora, because the system can take it from you at any minute, can change a whole life of an individual in Africa. Absolutely. That is what we need to understand. And that is the side of investment that we need to work towards as both Africans in the continent and those in the diaspora. Work towards, helping one another, work as entrepreneurs, and then hold to the values of the African continent. When it comes to kindness, when it comes to righteousness, when it comes to, generosity, when it comes to dedication, when it comes to energy at work and etc. These are ethics that are rooted in the African culture and African civilization, that you don't need to go to school to learn. No. You find that within the family. Exactly. So that is exactly what we're trying to say. So we need to understand that, and then we work towards it.
So I'm just going to wind up now by saying, just give me your general views on colonialism, neocolonialism, let me get it right. So colonialism, neocolonialism, in literally like 10 seconds, because we haven't got much time. So I just want both your points, and then we'll close. Yeah.
Neocolonialism, let me say, it's a reality, it's a fact, and it exists. And I must say this before we end this interview, that let the continent and the people of this continent think that it is not impossible for us to be recolonized physically. I'm not talking about neocolonialism, for us to be colonized by the same powers that colonize us again, because there is every indication that that is possible. They have military base in Africa, they dictate African leaders, they threaten force at some instance. Remember the case of Tony Blair and against Mugabe at some point in time. We will still remember the invasion of Libya. That was a clear aggression and invasion and, of the territorial integrity of Libya and so forth. So it's possible at any time that Africa wants to unite or Africa wants to really take up true independence, that the same powers that colonize us can really do the same evil that they have done earlier on.
Finally, I just want to say that I am optimistic about the future of the continent, in a sense that we have very young people that are ready to take the struggle and then to make it possible. But these individuals also need protection from everywhere.
Yes.
And that is we need to understand the fact that not everybody is pleased with, people who are ready to make the change. And they are set to do whatsoever. But they also must understand that we're not giving up for this continent. We were born in this continent, and we will live and we will die for this continent. So, yeah.
So what's your last words, or advice or appreciation that you'd like to express?
Okay, let me say thank you to iGambia and the platform and everybody watching, and I'll encourage our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, let them understand and come back and know that the continent needs them. We need each other, we can do it, and the reason why Africa is liberated today, we must also put it into notice, is that it was because of the activities of those who were in the diaspora. Most of these Pan-African leaders, they came back from the colonial land, the colonial masters' land, back to Africa, and they really fought for the change. So we appreciate their effort, and we really want them to come back to the continent and let us reconnect and then move. They can even form political parties, Pan-African political parties, to make Africans understand that we need to take charge of our governance system. We cannot leave it in the hands of others. Let us take charge of our governance system, come on board, establish Pan-African political parties, the like of the EFF you have in South Africa. Let us sell the agenda of Africa that represent Africa. At the end of the day, we are going to really be liberated. Thank you.
And don't forget to support our model for automatic citizenship, which is very, very important, and to support CODE, which is the Council of African Descendants here in the Gambia. And I'll tell you more about that model soon. But I just want to say thank you, a very big thank you to Bla and to Hatib for allowing us to do this interview here at the beautiful and wonderful environs of Club Envy here in Fajara. So Club Envy will be reopening as soon as COVID-19 is over. So I'll be here to party hard. It is one of the best and most prestigious clubs here in the Gambia. So I just would like to thank Bla and Hatib for allowing us to be here today on behalf of Blaxit and also on behalf of iGambia. I'd like to thank iGambia for granting us this platform here today, allowing us to talk our heart's desires and to talk, our passion for Africa, and to share the knowledge and to share our experiences and our love of Africa, because Africa is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And if you haven't been here, come see. As soon as the skies open, come see through the eye of Gambia.